So you're thinking about buying a house. You ever wondered what's actually happened in that house? Are you afraid that bad things have happened? Well, stick around, and I got some really interesting news to share with you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Hudson. My call sign is Nuke. I'm a retired Air Force member and a real estate agent here in the Las Vegas area. Many people reach out to me every single day from around the country and Las Vegas to help with their real estate needs, whether buying a home, selling a home, or investing in real estate. If you need some kind of help within the next 9 to 90 days or even beyond that, please reach out. All of my information is below, and I'll get back to you as soon as humanly possible. And also, if you haven't subscribed, you can of course do that. So I'm as big of a YouTube fan as many of you are. And one of my favorite YouTubers is an attorney out of Michigan known as Steve Leto. I don't think I've missed a single one of his videos because they're so interesting and they involve things I'm interested in. Interesting fact, I actually had a full ride scholarship to law school, but I took another path, aka going into the military after I got my undergraduate degree instead of taking that scholarship to law school. So I kind of like to follow the law a little bit and wonder what life would have been like. So what he's talking about today is a really interesting subject. And I did a Steve Leto review video before, and I didn't think I would be doing one this soon again, but this one just peeked out there because he normally talks about like lemon law, because he specializes in lemon law. He talks a lot about cars. He's written several books about cars. Now, this was interesting because not only is it a real estate subject, but it involves here in Las Vegas, and it has information that a lot of people, especially going to buy a house, should actually know about. So let's go ahead and get a sneak peek into what he's talking about.
Every now and then I see a headline, and Scott sent me this one. But the headline is interesting because although it's an intriguing concept, the question is this news? Because stuff like this happens a lot, and there's no laws that address this in the way that many people think there are. So if nothing else, we'll talk about it just to...
Before he gets into it, a lot of people think that there are a bunch of laws and people have to tell you things. These are known as disclosures. A lot of things don't have to be disclosed, so we're going to go over those throughout this.
Clear up some confusion. But the headline is, man unknowingly moves into apartment where a murder took place just months before. And
where a murder took place. So now you're going to wonder, wait a minute, shouldn't somebody tell me that a murder took place? Well, you're going to find out. No, they don't.
And Lauren Martinez and Andrew McMunn wrote this. Out of Las Vegas, a man just moved into an apartment in northwest Las Vegas. But after he moved in, he learned it was the site of a murder just a few months ago. So the man was scouring the internet looking for a good deal on an apartment. He's got roommates, and so the three of them were hoping to find a good place the three of them could stay. He found a 3-bedroom unit starting at $1,600, and they signed the lease and moved in on June 1st.
Well, as you can see, this is very recent. And let's start talking one about rents. If you notice, it was $1,600. Rents have gone up. This isn't a separate thing, but for those of you who know, rents are going up and continuing to go up, and they've gotten very high. As a matter of fact, I was having a discussion with an uncle yesterday. It was his birthday, and it gets into a lot of family dynamics, which get interesting. But he was talking about a set of renters he had, and he had those renters in a condo that he had owned, and he had them there for like well over a decade, something like 18 years. Never really raised their rent. They were paying $500 a month in Atlanta, Georgia. The average rent in Atlanta, Georgia for a 1-bedroom apartment is $1,300. This was a 2-bedroom condo. They balked when he wanted to raise the rent to $700. So remember, $1,600, and some people can't take a gift horse. Oh my God, how do you raise my rent to $700 when the average rent on a 1-bedroom is $1,300 and we have a 2-bedroom? My goodness. Anyway, So those of you who don't know, who are not from Las Vegas, we're going to go ahead and bring the map in right now. And if you look on the map, the northwest area is right over and about this area here. So this area here is pretty much what's known as Centennial Hills area. There are some other areas around that, but the predominant community is Centennial Hills. It's also the master plan community of Providence. And there's actually another one coming in now called Sky Canyon. So you really have Centennial Hills predominantly.
So he said, when I moved in and unloaded my stuff, several neighbors stopped him and said, do you know what happened here? Do you want to move in? So on move-in day, neighbors told him a young woman had been murdered in that very same unit. So he said, I'm feeling really frustrated. I never expected this. When he went to management and asked about it, he said he was told they had no obligation to inform him if he did not specifically ask.
And that is the crux of it. They do not. In the state of Nevada, you do not have to disclose if there was a death in the house, unless the house caused the death, aka like the person was electrocuted or something like that. That you are required to disclose. Now, what if you were to go and say, hey, was there a murder in the house, something I should know? It can then become a material fact. You need to make it a material fact. What a material fact is something that would alter your decision on either purchasing the home or the price you are willing to offer. Just because there's been a murder in the home, some people may not care. I sold a house just last year where there was a very, very brutal murder. My clients didn't care. Some people do. It was very brutal. It's like multiple days in the paper brutal. So they didn't care. And to be honest, when we put the offer in, and even like by the time we even had the inspection, we didn't know about it. My client, to his own volition, actually was just looking up the house for something, and then he came across it. But he didn't care. He did not care. Some people would care a lot. And if you're one of those people, maybe it's something you should add to your list to ask. Can you ask them if there's been anything to go on in this house, like, I don't know, a murder? And again, they have to know about it. That agent who's listing the house may not know about it. The people who are selling the house may not know, or they know and they did not disclose it to their agent. If they didn't disclose it and he didn't ask the question, he just came back with, I don't know, you can go with that. Or I have some more options for you a little bit later. I'm going to actually show you a way you can find out.
Is there a law that says they have to tell you if someone is murdered in an apartment? So Las Vegas real estate agent Megan Foley told KVVU about the state's disclosure laws, and according to Nevada law, we do not have to disclose if it was a homicide or a suicide. However, we would have to disclose if it had been used to manufacture meth.
And I got to stop there. I'm sorry. That information is absolutely incorrect. It's not absolutely incorrect. It's a little incorrect. You do have to disclose if it had been used to make meth, if it has not been remediated. If it has been remediated, they're not required to disclose this. And remediation is not a cheap process. It's tens of thousands of dollars. Most people are going to remediate the house. That's why you never see a disclosure. This used to be a meth lab. You're not going to see that. Most people are going to remediate because it is going to affect the price greatly if you were to disclose meth lab. And I'm going to tell you a second here, a good meth lab story, and something else that does not have to be disclosed, period, that could be just as dangerous.
Or if there was a death related to meth, believe it or not. So real estate attorney Elizabeth Ashley said there's more duty on the buyer's part to investigate a property. She recommends...
Now, duty on the buyer's side to investigate. Well, if you want to know, there is a way. So, okay, so this website is called Death in House. And what you can do is go to this website and you can purchase either one report or multiples. And with that, if you have an issue with a death in a house, they actually track it. You know, for just about everything out there, somebody tracks something. These are the people who track if there's been a death in the house and what caused it. So if you have an issue with purchasing a house someone may have died in, I highly suggest you go to this site and look it up, because your agent is supposed to be give you the information of the information kind of thing, be the source of the source. Well, here's a source that you can use. Link is down below, of course. Take this time, and it's part of your due diligence. And we'll talk about due diligence in a second also.
Checking with neighbors before moving in and asking them about what they like and dislike about living there. Now, there's a woman who lives in the apartment unit directly under the unit where the woman was murdered, and she says she's brought to tears bringing up what she and her husband heard the night that happened. She said management never checked in on her, but officers did. They asked to see her apartment as they were doing the investigation. And so a lot of people knew about what happened because the police had investigated and knocked on doors of neighboring units.
Now, I'll talk about my meth story here. So I was doing an open house at a house. This was like early in my career, still on active duty, doing real estate part-time. And I stepped out for a second, and neighbor, she just walked over and we just started having a nice little conversation. Older woman, probably in her late 60s, early 70s. And then she starts talking about the meth lab that was in the house. That it was a major meth lab, and she can remember when the house was raided and everything. I'm like, oh, thanks. That was a major meth lab. You know, I'm just doing an open house. So I go and talk to the owner / seller. Interesting gentleman. I don't even know if this is germane to talk about on this video, but he was an interesting guy because he would stay there during the open houses, because he also sold furniture. So he staged the house with the furniture he would sell and try to sell the furniture during the open houses. Long story. So anyway, he goes, you're not allowed to talk about that. I don't want you to tell anybody that this house used to be a meth lab. Yeah, that happens more than you think. People know these things, and they don't want anyone to know because they don't want it to affect the price. Of course, you can do some research and find out. Now, if it's remediated, it is not going to harm you. But here's the other one that there is no law about. For those of you who didn't know, marijuana is legal in the state of Nevada. Well, some of these houses used to be grow houses, and you are not, period, required to disclose if it was a grow house. Guess what? With all the chemicals they use, it could be just as dangerous as if there was a meth lab. And there were a lot of grow houses. I can remember one time showing this particular property to a couple, and I started joking. This is after marijuana had become legal here. That, you know what, this would make a perfect grow house kind of location. They looked at each other and they were like, yeah, we were thinking the same thing. So then I'm talking to, I don't know if I call him the seller. It was the seller's husband who, long story, he was getting nothing out of it, but he was still like helping his ex-wife. I don't know if she was current wife, ex-wife, whatever the dynamic was, the house. And I didn't even say anything about a grow house, and we're just talking, and he was starting to talk about his grow operation. His grow operation? So the house I thought was a perfect grow house, my clients were thinking the same thing, that they could make some extra money. Then when talking to, I'm going to call him the seller now, it's like, oh yeah, I used to have a great grow operation here till they legalized marijuana, and then, you know, it was just not viable anymore. He was mad because they legalized marijuana and it took away his business. People are funny. Anyway, so that one you probably will never find out about. The only thing I can think for a grow house possibly is you could probably bring in some kind of remediation company that would, sniff the air, see if there are any residual chemicals around. Other than that, you're probably not going to find out.
It's important to her to let her new neighbor know about the incident. I don't think you should just move a person into an apartment complex with them not knowing or aware of a situation like that, she said. For the state's legal requirements for any sale, lease, or rental, you can visit the state's website. Nevada's got all the information online. And so here's the question. Some of you are saying, Steve, why would you know anything about this? Well, I wrote a book called American Murder Houses. American Murder Houses is available wherever fine books are sold. I do not have any.
It is on Amazon. I looked it up. I'm actually thinking about getting this book, but I have so many books in my reserve I need to read, but I may go ahead and put this in my rotation. American Murder Houses. It's on Amazon.
Copies right now other than my own personal copy, so I apologize. A lot of my books I do sell, but right now I don't have any extras of this. But I wrote a book called American Murder Houses, and I talk about famous homes, notorious houses of homicide. But at the very end of the book, I have a chapter in there about what happens to murder houses later with respect to sales and the legalities of it, because I am, after all, an attorney. And so a lot of people just assume that there must be a law against selling a murder house without telling anybody. And I don't know why you'd think that, because generally speaking, there are almost no laws on this. Now, there are a couple states, and I mention them in the book, and I actually do lay all this stuff out in the book. But there were a couple court cases also, some very, very well-known court cases, where there was a person, I believe in the state of New York, who had a house that they said there'd been a murder taking place there, and it was haunted. And they used to actually give tours of the haunted house and talk about the murder history of the house. And later on, they sold the house and did not disclose any of that to the buyer. And the buyer went into court and said, they should have told me about the history of the house, because they made money off the history of the house. I mean, it's just one.
Okay, again, this is an issue that's state by state, and it evolves around disclosures. If the state does not say you have to disclose a murder, you do not. But if you have an issue with it, you need to bring it up. Okay?
One of those things they can't claim they didn't know. And a court actually said, based on those facts, the seller should have disclosed. But there have been other cases, there's a famous case out of California, where somebody moved into a house, and it turns out there had been tragic murder there previously. And as the people are moving in, the neighbors come running breathlessly over to say, did you guys know the story of this house? And in that case, the question then becomes, what burden, what legal obligation does a seller have to disclose this information? And in a lot of states, the concept of misrepresentation comes in here, and be silent misrepresentation. So fraud is where I out and out tell you something that's false to get you to do something or mislead you, and it harms you. But if I don't speak, and I could have spoken, my failure to speak can be considered a form of misrepresentation, depends what state you're in. And silent misrepresentation is where I simply don't tell you something that I know you'd like to know if you knew it, but you don't know.
If you knew it, you can argue this all day long. Spend tens of thousands of dollars in court. They can say it was your burden to ask the question. So let's go on.
No, it's how would you know? And so there are some states where you can go after somebody and say, you know darn well that if you told me the true history of this house, I either wouldn't have bought it or I'd pay less for it.
Yeah, and I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of things those sellers are not telling you, even when they're supposed to. Okay? Now, for the material facts that they are required to tell you, if they do not disclose them, if known, material facts, like condition of house, of course, we've just established that murder may not be a condition. As a matter of fact, before I moved here, I was stationed in Hawaii, and only as I was moving out did one of the neighbors mention about prior to us taking this, the owner's husband died and wasn't found for a bit in the backyard. It actually overlooked a really nice park and the water on and everything. So, but regardless, I lived there for years and didn't know that someone had died in the house. Oh, by the way, in case you didn't know, there are certain groups of people who have an issue with death in a house. And in Hawaii, about 66% of the population comprises members of this group. So they did not disclose it, which is interesting. I don't know what the Hawaii laws are on this.
So that's wrong. And some states say, yeah, you can go after somebody for that. But there are states that have codified this and actually created statutes that say if a murder takes place in this house within a certain time frame, you must disclose it. But obviously, who cares if one happened 100 years ago, 8 owners ago? Does that matter? So they often put time frames on it. But one of the most interesting things is there are people out there who've studied this. Of course there are. And there are people who've studied the market for murder houses. And that is, if you had 2 identical houses in the exact same market, everything is equal, except one of them had a murder in it 6 months ago, and one of them did not. What is the difference? And there are people who've done papers on this, peer-reviewed papers on this, with tons of data, who've drawn the conclusion that the murder house does not sell for less, not substantially.
I can attest to this. The house I was talking about that I sold last year, that was the brutal murder house, and the murder was like the previous owner. It sold for full price. Matter of fact, we offered well over, and like I said, my clients didn't care.
What happens is it's simply on the market longer, which
I can attest to this. Even though we were able to get it and we were putting in offer after offer after offer. So I don't know if everybody else was looking it up or not, or it was just coincidence. It was actually on the market just a little bit longer than the average house back then. A little bit, not much, but a little bit. So I don't know if other people looked it up or something, and I sincerely doubt that. I think it was just coincidence. But from what I understand, because I don't keep up with local news as much as that and figuring out who got killed where, maybe people knew and it affected things. This is another reason that you need to check into this stuff, and we'll talk about due diligence.
is an economic impact. If you want to sell your house and you can sell it today or 6 months from now, you'd rather sell it now if you could, okay? And so the idea that they're on the market longer is a market impact by the home's history, but it does not lower the price. So the interesting thing is here a guy moves into an apartment. He's not even buying it. He's simply renting it. And the fact that he's moving into an apartment that he's renting where something like this took place, there ain't a whole lot he can do about that other than just, get creeped out by it. One of the favorite things that I encountered when I was writing the book, I was doing the research on the legal aspects of it, and I found the opinion out of California. And one of the judges wrote in the opinion, because the case actually went through a couple different courts, one of the judges wrote an opinion and said, do you know what the most fascinating thing is about murder houses? Is that a home will have something happen like this at it. The owners will sell it and not tell anybody. Then the owners move out and the buyers move in. And while the moving trucks are still being unloaded, neighbors come running over to tell them what happened in the house. And that is so funny because that's what happens. And
that's what happens. Now, I've never thought about this. What if they care that much about the murder house, why don't they put up signs pointing to the house going, someone was murdered there? I don't know the legalities on that, but that would be funny. And here's my quick thought on it. Quick thought. That may have been a murder house, but if that house doesn't sell, or if it sells for less than normal, it affects their property value. That's a good thought. Now think about that. I don't want to affect the sale at this point because I want my property value to stay high. But when the moving trucks are there, I'm going to just go ahead and talk to them. Interesting. What's your thoughts on that? If you have a thought on that, leave that thought below.
That I've heard that story or variations of it more than once, where somebody's moving into their dream home and the neighbor comes strolling over and goes, "Did you know what happened in this house?" And it's like, could you have told me that a little while ago? But of course, they're not going to run over and interfere with every single prospect who's walking through the house. So it's a crazy story. Some people would get creeped out by it. And of course, the question is if this apartment complex is obligated to tell people what took place in that apartment. And there's no law that says that in Nevada. So there you go. Man
Admits it. In Nevada, there's no law in Nevada. So I'm here in Nevada. And if you are thinking about purchasing a home or selling a home here in Nevada, just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you out with that. All of my contact information is below, along with all of the other information that you may need on stuff that's going on here in Nevada, including access to all of the homes that are for sale or your home value if you want. If you have not subscribed, I will appreciate that. I am approaching 1,000 subscribers now, which was like my ultimate goal. It's kind of like that, gives that warm and crusty feeling or something. So at 1,000 subscribers, I actually have a very, very special gift that I'm going to be giving out. So be on the bandwagon to be at that 1,000 on that day. Also, I have some more videos for you guys to watch. And thank you, Steve Leto. I would really go look at his channel. It is one of the most fascinating channels I have ever seen. And I love going there and I look at every single video he puts out.